Welcome to OLC 4.0. This is term 2B. We are on class 5, assignment number 6 and number 7, and we're also looking at the 4 types of sentences. I am Jillian Percy, and hang on, correction there. Okay. Today we are looking at different types of sentences, different ways to ask. I don't think we're doing that one. Learning how to use questions as a reading strategy, understanding how to make predictions and connections before reading a text, completing assignment number 6 and assignment number 7. Okay, so quickly, just the 4 basic sentence types and their punctuation. There are 4 main types of sentences: declarative, which is a telling sentence; interrogative, which is a question; imperative, which is a command; and exclamatory, which is when somebody's excited. So most of these follow the format of the subject, the noun or the pronoun, and then the predicate, which is like the verb and the associated words. So a declarative statement is like the most common type of sentence. It simply tells you information, description, narration, or opinions, and they end with a period. Examples might be things like, I like the red car. The train leaves at 1:15 p.m. The tree was covered in red and yellow leaves. Then we've got exclamatory sentences. These ones express strong emotion or sometimes loud volume, and they generally end with an exclamation point. I hate you. Today is the best day ever. The murderer is one of us. I will love you forever. Imperative sentences. These are commands. They can end with a period or with an exclamation point, depending on the type of emotion. So if I'm saying, please do the dishes, probably doesn't need an exclamation point. But if a fireman is yelling at somebody who's in a burning building, jump, then it's a command, but it's an excited command, so it's going to have an exclamation point. Imperative sentences generally start with the verb. They're telling you what to do first. They're not usually addressing, they don't usually say the noun or the pronoun because it's kind of assumed that you're talking to the you. You could be singular, you could be plural, but they don't keep writing it over and over again. So things like, get out of here, put the chicken in the oven at 350 degrees Celsius, turn left at the corner to go to the grocery store. Okay, so it's a very direct type of speech, and the sentence, the subject is not needed in there. Interrogative and question sentences. These sentences ask a question, and they use a question mark at the end of it. We're going to cover the most basic type of question right now. There are more complicated types, okay? These ones are ones that start with the question words. Things like who, what, where, when, why, or how. Who are you? What are you doing this evening? Where did the money go? When does school end? Why is your brother crying? So these things, who, what, where, when, why, these are acting as the subject in the sentence. And then you can see there's the verb, are, did, does, and is. So they're still following the format. Okay, so what types of sentences are these? Democracy is when you choose a leader through voting. Okay. Are they telling us something, asking us something, commanding us to do something, or are they excited about something? It's basically just a declarative sentence, right? It's just a telling us what something is. There we go. I'm scared. Okay, so see that exclamation point? That's a pretty good hint. It's probably exclamatory. It could be imperative, but that would be a command, and there's no command there. So it's exclamatory. The town meeting will start at 8 o'clock tonight. Okay, that's clearly not interrogative, right? They're not asking a question. They're not excited. They're not commanding. It's declarative. Like I said, it's the most common. What day is your race on? Question mark. The moment you see the question mark, it's an interrogative sentence. Interrogative, sorry, I'm saying it wrong. Clean up this mess right now. Okay, so now this one you could choose. It is essentially an imperative, right? They are giving you a command. They're telling you what to do. It is also excited, but I think the command part is more important. Help me. Now that one I would call purely exclamatory. It is kind of a command, but it's more they're yelling because they're excited. I mean, excited in a bad way, an unhappy way. Okay, so this lesson is about asking questions that other people are asking us or that we are asking ourselves. And you can ask questions at different times in reading. You could ask them before you read, or during your reading, or after you read. A lot of research shows that reading with a question in mind, whether it's your own question or someone else's, can often help you remember what you read a lot more effectively. And it gives you a point of view to look at the text through. So, especially with reading like this, where it isn't necessarily a novel you would have chosen yourself. Like you may enjoy it, but it's not the same thing as picking up a book that you love. So having a bit of a point of view when you're reading can kind of help focus your mind so you don't kind of just drift away and read the words without really remembering anything, which happens to all of us at some points. Okay, so there's three main categories of questions. Directly stated questions. In other words, they're looking for information that's just been said directly in the novel. There's nothing tricky. You just got to find the right information. Indirectly stated questions. That way they're looking for information that hasn't been said out and out. You kind of got to read between the lines, right? So if I'm saying, is so and so in love with the main character? Well, maybe it says, I love you somewhere in the book, but maybe it's more a matter of, oh, well, he's always doing things for her. Oh, he got her this big expensive present on her birthday. You're going to have to kind of put two and two together and understand what's happening. And then making connections, that's where you're thinking about how what's happening in the book relates to your life or to another book or to real world events. And there's often key words that you can look at that give you a hint as to what type of question you're looking at. If it says find, list, locate, identify, tell, those are all hints that the question is saying, hey, it's right there in the novel. Just look for it and you'll find it. Indirectly stated, if you see words like predict, use clues to, think about, okay, questions that start with those words are not directly stated. You're going to have to do some thinking and kind of be a little bit of a detective and figure out what's happening. And then when it's making connections, it will often start with things like, what do you think about? What do you do if, in your opinion? And there it's inviting you to use your experiences and what you know about the world to state an opinion or make a prediction or to draw some conclusions, right? So this is part of lesson 2. It's worth 50 marks, all of it. Um, there's I believe, three assignments. Um, so understanding directly stated information, ideas, and texts. They sometimes call this reading on the lines, like it's just right there. Understanding indirectly stated information and ideas and texts, reading between the lines. You're going to have to put two and two together. And then making connections between personal experiences and ideas and information in the book. And sometimes they call that reading beyond the lines. Most reading questions you'll be asked throughout this course will fall under one of the above categories. The trick is to learn the key words which will help you figure out what type of question you're being asked. Once you know what you're being asked, even if you're not sure of the answer, you've got a better idea how to complete it. So we've just talked about the few keywords for the category, and you might think of some others. Now, not every question is going to include one of these keywords, but after a while, you're going to see that there's a pattern to these types of questions, and you're going to recognize what they're looking for as you go along. Okay. This is just to help you get started out in the beginning because sometimes people aren't aware that there's a pattern to these types of questions. Every time they look at a question, it seems like, oh, this is a brand new question. And it's like, well, it kind of is. It may be asking you to find or think about or invent new information, but there's often a pattern or a structure behind the question that you get used to after a while, and it makes it easier to understand how to answer the questions. Okay, so directly stated information. This is information that is clearly told to us in the text or the book. Often the way they word it is a clue that this will be the case. It's usually very specific, very detail oriented. When did he get to school? He got to school a little bit late. Who does he live with? He lives with his parents. Where did the little boy go? The little boy disappeared into the store. What happened when the principal called him into the office? Oh, the principal was mad at him because of blah, blah, blah. And it's usually very clear, very obvious. You just got to find where in the book it happened, okay? And then indirectly stated information. This is much harder because of the reading between the lines. It might say things like, how do you think the character feels? But when you reread that part, there isn't anything that says how he feels. But if you see the question says, how do you think? Or what do you think? They're asking for your opinion. Now, maybe in the part that you just read, it says he shouted, he slammed a door, and then he went outside and kicked the dog. Okay, well, they didn't tell you he's angry, but you could put two and two together and go, that's the way people act when they're angry sometimes. So that might be what he's feeling. And then you would just kind of say it that way. I think in this situation that the character feels angry for several reasons. First, he starts shouting at his mother. Later, he slams the door and walks off. And then finally, he kicks the dog as he walks away. These seem like the actions of an angry person. So you're pointing out what in the text makes you think the idea that you have, right? You're sort of a detective explaining your thinking and explaining your clues. Um, some other phrases that might indicate they're wanting an opinion from you or that you're going to have to make an inference would be phrases like, what do you think caused this action? How do you imagine the character feels about what just happened? Make a prediction about what Betty should do next or will do next based on her actions and statements in the book. In your opinion, what should the character do next? Or I'm going to say what will. Should is a little bit different. What will the character do next? Use clues from the chapter to predict what event will happen next. Think about the character's problem and make suggestions about how he might. I'm going to take that one. I don't like that one. Okay. I'm going to, because it's more about connections, and that's why I'm taking that one away. Making connections is when you find similarities between the text and something else. Now, this is one of those questions that if you are younger, this is the kind of thing they ask a lot these days and maybe the last 10, 15 years. But if you're one of my older students like me, they never asked me these kind of questions when I was in school. So this might be a whole new type of question to you. So that's why I'm kind of going more into detail on how to do it, okay? Text to self, in that case, it just means you're looking for a connection between your life and what the character is going through. Could be you're looking at their feelings or events. So in that case, you might say something like, I can relate to how Josh probably feels when Karen turns him down at the dance. I bet he feels embarrassed even though he starts acting angry because when I have been turned down, because when I have been turned down, that is how I felt. So you're talking about the book and then comparing it to yourself. There's also text to text. In this type, you're looking connections between the text you're reading and another text that you might have similar events or themes. So, for example, maybe Maggie and Jennifer are nurses in a war. Maggie is in the Middle East in modern times, and Jennifer is in a war in the World War One. But they both feel overwhelmed by all the death and despair they see all around them. Now, we don't do a lot of that in this course, but this might come up in some of your other English courses. Text to world. In this type, you look for connections between what you're reading and real life events, right? Could be things like wars or natural disasters or anything where it's like, I may not have gone through this, but real people have, and I know what happened to them. So, for example, this book is occurring in the aftermath of a hurricane. I've never been in a hurricane, but I have watched the news during Hurricane Katrina, and I saw the reports on the lack of food, clean water, and safe housing. So, this book seems very realistic to me. So, those are some ways that you can make connections if it's asking you to make connections in the story. Okay. Uh, the timing of this is really weird, but anyways, um, a note on the reading. There is a reading log here. Please try and fill these out. Make a couple copies before you do that. We're looking for anything that you're reading away from the course. Things like emails, texts, magazines, newspapers, and keep track. What day did you read it? What type of text was it? What was the title? How long did you spend reading it, or how many pages did you read? And what was the main idea? We're going to be talking about this throughout the course. It comes up again in our literacy portfolio at the very end, the very last question. Whenever you see this little purple book guy, it's just a reminder to make sure you're entering your reading. You don't want to wait to the very end and suddenly have to do a whole bunch at once. That'll be frustrating. Okay, so before reading, asking yourself some questions. Um, what can I ask myself before reading to help me understand this text? What do I already know? I wonder if, what do I need to know? Now, these questions to me seem very good if you are reading nonfiction or factual reading, like you're about to read a science textbook or a history textbook. I don't know if they work as great for fiction. For fiction, you might want to ask different questions. Things like, what might happen? Who are the characters? Where are they? What genre is this? What problem might happen? What conflict might occur? Same kind of thing where if you were sitting down to watch a movie with a friend and you were like waiting for the reviews to go by, you might be talking a little bit before the movie comes on and asking yourself, oh, what do you think might happen? Oh, well, I heard blah, blah, blah. And you're just kind of like getting yourself thinking about things before you start. And that is a great thing to do before you read because it kind of gets your brain sort of turned on and focused so that we're not just kind of reading the words without really thinking about the words. Okay, so here's the actual assignment. It's worth 10 marks. It says you're about to read book number 1, Jimmy Comes Home of the Green Star Lake series by Robert Checkwich. Before you begin reading it, take some time to judge the book by its cover. Also, take some time to just hold the book in your hand and look at the different features to give yourself an idea what the series might be about. Use the following questions as guidelines to help you. Notice that some of the key question words have been highlighted for you. Indicate whether the question is asking about directly stated information, DS, indirectly stated information, or making a connection by circling your choice, which if you're writing in your unit, they actually have the little short forms there, DS, IS, MC. And by all means, you're welcome to tell me it does count for a little bit. So first question says, think about the title and write at least 3 sentences to predict what will happen in this story. Hopefully you'll come back to your prediction as you read and compare your ideas with what actually does happen. So see how they made the word predict in that dark, bold typography? Predictions use indirectly stated information in order to make a reasonable guess about the future. So here we see the word predict, so we know we're going to be using indirectly stated information. It's not just going to tell us right away. We're going to have to think about it. And all we're really using for this is the title at this point. That's it. Okay. Remember that predictions are based on the future and they don't just state information we already know. So, in other words, if the title of the book is Jimmy Comes Home, we can't make a prediction that states, I predict Jimmy will come home. Well, the book kind of already told us that was happening right now. So, that's not a prediction, right? By the same reason, we can't predict things that have already happened in the past. I predict that Jimmy was away somewhere. No, that doesn't count as a prediction either because it already happened. The title's already told us that. So please don't predict those 2 things because I mark them wrong because they aren't correct. They aren't predictions. They're something that's already been told to us. A prediction is going to be new. Okay. You could make a prediction about the main character. I predict that Jimmy, and you can tell me what you think might happen with Jimmy. Or you can make a prediction about other characters. I predict that Jimmy's old friends might, or I predict that Jimmy's family might. You can make a prediction about just general events that might happen. I predict that Jimmy's school might. You could make a prediction about the type of conflict or problems that might happen. I predict that the conflict in this story will be about or will be between, and you're making a reasonable guess, right? You're acting like a kind of like a weatherman, right? You're not talking about what's happening right now. You're talking about what's going to happen in the future. And I'm not worried about whether you're right. I don't mark on right or wrong. I mark on whether it's reasonable. Okay. So Jimmy Comes Home is a realistic novel. So it would be weird to predict that Jimmy suddenly gets picked up by aliens and has his brain sucked out because that doesn't happen in realistic novels. So that wouldn't make sense to predict, right? It has to be a reasonable prediction. Okay. So question number 2 is a little bit tricky because it kind of asks a lot of questions at once. And I find it's easy to forget them and it's also a little bit confusing. So I'm going to tackle each of these questions one by one. I'm going to talk about it right here and then break it down. Number 2, what do you think about the title of this novel? Does it suggest any connections to your own life or raise any questions? Come up with 3 questions you have about the plot of the novel you're about to read. As you read the novel later on, come back to your questions and see if they have been answered. Is this directly stated, indirectly stated, or are you making connections? So, what do you think? Um, does it make any connections to your life? Create 3 questions. What do you think about the novel? Okay, so you can see right here, that's one of the making connections type of questions. Okay. They make this even clearer by adding, does it suggest any connections to your own life? They're giving you a hint. You're trying to make connections. So tell us what you think about the title. They don't mean it's a good title, it's a bad title, because that doesn't really tell us anything. But what does it make you think about? So the title, Jimmy Comes Home, reminds me of a time when, and you talk about something you did that reminds you of that. The title, Jimmy Comes Home, makes me wonder, and you would talk about whatever questions you had in your mind. The title Jimmy Comes Home makes me think that, and you might talk about what you believe is going to happen because of that. Okay. So think about the title and make some connections and then come up with 3 questions. Okay. Hang on. Okay, I'm making connections for a second. Some different ways to make connections to yourself. You may feel there's a lot of connections between you and someone or not at all. Maybe you've been through similar events or situations, like you've both been sick in the hospital for a long time. Maybe you have similar personality traits, like you're both very outgoing. You might have similar heritage, culture, religion, gender, age, sexual orientation. You might have similar feelings, like you've both been in love or you've both been depressed. You might have similar interests or activities. Maybe you're both gamers. Maybe you're both hockey players. Might have similar strengths or weaknesses. Like maybe you're both really good at building things or you're both really weak at singing. Might have similar types of friends or family or romantic relationships. Might live in similar communities, regions, landforms, climate, or with similar politics. You don't have to answer all of these. This is just kind of help you generate some ideas because every now and again somebody looks at a character and they just go, I have nothing in common with that person at all. Well, first of all, there's a 50% chance you do right away, right? If they're a boy and you're a boy, whoop, already there's connection, right? And then do they live in a similar community? Do they have any kind of similar feelings? A lot of times, if you look at feelings, we have felt some of the same things that characters have felt, and we can kind of approach making connections that way. That's one of the easiest way. The other thing is similar events or situations. All of us have been on a first date. All of us, or probably most of us anyways, have been in love. All of us have been disappointed at some time or made fun of at some point. So we can experience understand a character better by making that connection. So you can create 3 questions about the plot. The plot is what events happen. So you have question words like who, when, where, why, how, what, or what happened. Sometimes words like do, is, are, will, have are also used at the beginning of a question. Now you can't just write a question word, right? That's not adequate. I'm looking for complete sentences, and you need it to relate to the plot of the novel in some way. What are some possible events that might happen in a novel called Jimmy Comes Home? How do you think community members will treat Jimmy? How will people at the school feel to have him back? What kind of things might happen with his friends? What events might happen with the cops? So those are the kinds of things we're looking at where you might create a very specific type of question. Okay, look the novel over and jot down your own opinions or thoughts about the following three things. One, what do you think about the length of the novel, the organization of the novel, and the level of language or the words used in the novel? So remember that opinions often start with phrases like I think, or I feel, or I believe. I think the length of the novel is, and you just tell me, is it too long, too short? Is it just right? I feel the organization of the novel is kind of a tricky one. You might talk about the chapter headings or the chapter titles or how long the chapters are or whatever else you think is important about how it's organized. I think the level of language is easy, hard, appropriate, interesting, boring. Kind of all depends on what you think, right? So that's assignment 6. Now we're looking at assignment number 7. It is worth 16 marks. And the first little bit of just talking about stuff, the questions don't actually begin until page 30. Sometimes that part is kind of confusing. So this part right here is not our actual questions, okay? Don't get mixed up. This is just asking us some ideas. It's teaching us. It's not the actual questions, okay? I think that assignment number 7 is one of the hardest questions, not because the questions are hard, but because for some crazy reason they spread it out over like 5 pages and people get so confused going like, where are the questions? It's just, I don't know, they spread it out weird. Not sure why. Um, so it starts on chapter 20 on page 27 and it runs all the way to page 31, okay? There are some questions on 31 that a lot of people miss. And then I have to say, oh, can you please grab that question? And you got to go back and do it again. So just notice it right away from the start. So during reading, you might ask yourself questions like, does this make sense? How does this information connect to what I already know? What does the writer say about something? What does the writer mean by this particular thing? I still need answers to this question, la la la. Okay, so now we're going to start reading chapter 1. Not only should you keep the above questions in mind, but as with any assignment, when you're going to answer questions based on the information provided in the text, it's always best to read the questions before you read the text. And this helps guide you when you're reading for information and makes the questions pop out of the text. So read the following questions before you read chapter 1 and then answer them while you read it using the RAPROC method we'll talk about shortly, okay? Now, I think some people are confused by the dot, dot, dot. It's not a period said over and over times. An ellipse means I'm not finished or I have left things out. And they're wanting you to finish it. So if they say, I wonder, they're not finished. That's not a whole sentence. They're saying, I wonder, and they want you to finish it. Like, I wonder why Jimmy doesn't want to talk to Teresa. They want you to figure that part out, but they want you to finish it. It's not finished. It's not just 3 periods, okay? I think that part is confusing for some people. Um, an ellipse can also be used in dialogue or in thought bubbles to show that a character's kind of trailed off into silence. For example, Betty said, Lynn lied when she told the police she was with me. Maybe she is the one who, and she stops talking and we don't know what it is, right? Maybe she's afraid to say it. Maybe it's too private. Sometimes it's used to indicate that somebody's paused for a dramatic effect. Sherlock looked around the room at all the suspects gathered there. The murderer is Lady Ashton. Sometimes it's used to indicate that there's more information to come. You'll often see this in like a comic book at the very end of a little series. It'll say to be continued, dot, dot, dot. And they're letting you know, hey, we're not finished. There's more to this story. Okay, so this is the RAPROC method. RAPROC is, I'm sorry, mangling it. RAPROC is just an acronym, okay? It's just a way to help you think about how to write longer answers in writing. Because for some people, they're kind of not sure what are they wanting, and they're just kind of answering one question and they're not sure what's going on. So this is kind of giving you ways to add more details to your answers when that is required, okay? R is restate, which means you're going to use words from the question to begin your answer. A is for answer, which means you're going to answer the question. P is for prove. You're going to use ideas and examples from the text to prove or support your answer. The second R is for relate. Relate means they're going to make connections to yourself, to other books, or to the world. O is for opinion. Explain what you think and what your opinion is and why. C is for conclude. Wrap it all up with a good ending. So the following is an example of a question being answered using this method. Why is Jimmy upset at the airport when he hears they've started going through everyone's bags? Now they give an answer. I gotta be honest, I don't like their answer because I actually think A, they don't follow their own system, and B, they actually give some misinformation. They say that Jimmy's mad because he thinks they're going through the bags. But actually, if you read the chapter carefully, they are going through the bags. The problem is he's worried they're going to do a body search and he's completely freaked out and does not want to have them do a body search. So it's important to read what you're reading carefully so you know what it actually is saying. So you don't need to answer every question that we have in this course this thoroughly, but it's really good for if it says like this is worth 4 marks, and you're like, oh, I don't know what to say. Here's what you kind of would go through. So restate. Jimmy is upset at the airport because, then you'd give the answer. He hears that they have started going through everyone's luggage and people. He feels this is an invasion of privacy because he does not have anything illegal on him. Prove. Jimmy says, no bloody way they're searching my body. I just left juvie 4 hours ago. How could I have anything on me? So I'm using a direct quote from the book. Relate. Oh, I always hate when they search my bags, as it makes me feel guilty even when I haven't done anything. Oh, opinion. I really don't think they should do that, as it kind of assumes you're a criminal. See, I think Jimmy has a right to be upset and suspicious about this. So I wouldn't put all those little the bolded parts. I would just run it together as a paragraph, but that's an example of how you would do it. So on page 29, the actual questions start. Where did Jimmy spend the last 18 months of his life? Why? It comes up right away in the first couple pages, okay? And then number 2, how does Jimmy feel about being home? Use clues from the text to answer this. Both of these questions are answered in the first page or two. Remember to answer in complete sentences. If you only give me like a word or two, I'm not going to give you the full marks. I'm going to cut your marks in half. It has to be a complete sentence. So for example, Jimmy spent the last 18 months in, where was he? Because he, what did he do to get there? Number 2, how does Jimmy feel about being home? Jimmy feels, I know this because what happens in the text that makes you think you know how he feels? It does get stated, in fact. Okay, number 3, pretend that a friend has asked you what this book is about and what Jimmy is like. Write a message to your friend, giving your opinion of Jimmy, the situation he's in, and any interesting comments you may like to share with your friend. The purpose here is to get to read your friend to read the book so the two of you could discuss it together. The three in the brackets means it's worth 3 marks. Remember that opinions often start with phrases such as I think, I feel, I believe. So what do you think about Jimmy as a person? Well, I think, or I feel Jimmy is. What do you think about the situation he's in? He's suddenly coming back to community after having been away for 18 months in juvie. How do you think he feels? How would you feel? How do you think, is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Can you make any connections to your own life or to the lives of other people around you? Oh, this is kind of going into example, again, connecting by thinking about similar events like going through a divorce, leaving home, starting college, having a child, getting married. We can connect by thinking about similar emotions, times when we felt happy, sad, scared, confused, betrayed, abandoned, depressed, welcomed, safe. We can connect by thinking about similar situations, like you guys both live with your grandparents, or living through a hurricane or a house fire, or getting a diagnosis of cancer or another serious disease, living in a big city, or living in a small town or a reservation, speaking similar languages, having a similar race, gender, culture. Sometimes there's events that happen that are similar if you are similar to that person. Even if a character's done something that we just haven't, like commit a murder, for example, sometimes we can still help ourselves understand their actions or have some sympathy for them by thinking about times that we got mad or we lost control or we felt betrayed, or maybe if we felt like we wanted to hurt somebody. Even if we didn't do it, we felt that. So that can help us understand and make a connection to that other character. During reading, okay, one of the questions talks about visualizing. And in visualizing, in words, you might say, I pictured what blank might look like. I created a mental image of whatever it is. I use the images to help me. How are they going to use you? Some people automatically picture or visualize things in their mind as they read, right? It just happens. They don't even have to think about it. Others need to stop and deliberately try and imagine what things might look like. Like when they're reading, they're just saying the words. They're not really thinking about how it might look. So if that's you, this question may be harder because you may have to stop and think, hey, what do I picture there? Or what could I picture there? Also, it might change depending on what type of activity is going on. So if I was reading a book about something that I'm familiar with, like say hockey, I can probably picture that pretty easily. I don't have to stop. I can just picture it in my head. But I'm not that all familiar with the British game of cricket. So if I was reading a chapter that had a game of cricket, I would have to really stop and think about what each person is doing and try and picture it and picture how the playing field looks because I don't have that background information. So all of a sudden, even though I often automatically picture things, in that case, I'm not because I don't understand it. So even if you normally visualize things, there may be times throughout the book where you're going to have to stop and think and make extra effort to visualize. And we have a question that kind of forces us to do that, right? So in this one, the question says, pretend you've been asked to turn this first chapter into like a comic strip with at least 4 pictures, and you're to sketch the main ideas in this chapter. Don't worry if you're not an artist, stick figures are just fine as long as you get the main idea of what's happening across. Use a full page for your 4 pictures. And this is worth 5 marks. So to begin with, think about what are the 4 main ideas anyways? What are the 4 big things or 4 important things that happen in this story? So I am not marking how realistic your art is. It can totally be stick figures. Here's an example I did, and I added some labels to make sure you understood what was happening. Here's my little funny airplane. There's Jimmy looking out a window. Here is the water below. Here is Green Lake Community. There's a road and some houses, and it says Jimmy is flying home. So that's my picture of what things look like. But that's only one picture. Remember, we have to do 4 pictures. So even if you kind of did something similar for your first picture, that's how the story starts, right? Okay, well, what happens next? And then what happens after that? And a lot of chapter 1 is a flashback. In other words, Jimmy is spending some time thinking about what happened in the past. It's totally okay to draw a picture of something that happened in the past because it is a big part of this novel. So don't feel like you have to go like in order of what things are happening. If Jimmy has a little flashback, you could easily just like, hang on, let me kind of show you what I mean here. You could draw like a little dream thing, right? So here's my little dream bubble. I could put Jimmy down here, and in the bubble, I could draw what Jimmy's remembering, right? That's one thing you could do. So make sure you send those in to me. Please hand it in as a full paper, not so tiny I can't actually see anything, okay? All right, next question is talking about inferences. What is an inference before we even get started? Well, Oxford Languages defines inference as a conclusion that is reached on the basis of evidence, things we actually have, and reasoning, right? Using logic and thinking about stuff. It's a noun. Their sample sentences, researchers are entrusted with drawing inferences from the data. Drawing inferences doesn't mean they're physically drawing a picture. It means they're figuring things out from the numbers and evidence they've collected, okay? So during reading, we often make inferences. And remember, we talked about how that's kind of reading between the lines, and they give us some possible questions. Based on what I've just read, I now realize the evidence that supports my thinking is I can now conclude I think blah, 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 because blah, blah, blah. So we make inferences all the time without even trying. It's just automatic, right? Because our brain is always trying to make sense of the world. If your mom walks in after work and slams the door and starts yelling, you can probably infer that she's feeling mad and maybe even that she had a bad day at work, right? If you see your little brother next to a bike on a road and he's got blood on his hands while he's crying, you could probably infer that he's fallen off his bike, right? We do it all the time when we just kind of walk around in our living, but sometimes we forget to do it when we're reading. We're waiting for the author to tell us what the person is feeling or what's happening. But the older we get, the more novels don't do that. They did that when we were younger, but novels written for young adults and for um, just regular adults kind of expect that you're going to read between the lines, that you're going to do some inferring. Okay. So definitely you'll have to do some inferring while reading this novel. So this is the very last question. This is the one on page 31. A lot of people miss it because it's kind of the back. And for some reason, question 7 has gone on so long. That's why. So here's what it says. Complete the following phrases as best you can based on your predictions about the text and your thoughts and ideas after reading it. So this is a comparing. You're comparing, here's what I did think, but now that I've read, here's my new ideas. Okay. And they gave us the exact same prompts that we just had in our little making inferences thing. And we're going to talk about each one. Okay. They want you to finish. Remember this dot, dot, dot. It's not a period. It means finish my sentence. Finish my sentence. This one, I don't like how they formatted it. It's not two different things. It's one. I think this because this. So we're going to tackle them one by one to give you some examples. Okay. The very first sentence starter says, based on what I have read, I now realize that. Okay. Please don't tell me that Jimmy comes home. You didn't infer that. You didn't conclude that. The title of the book tells you that. It tells you Jimmy comes home. So that is not a prediction and it is not a conclusion. Instead, look at your original predictions about the book that we did in question 6 and about Jimmy and talk about how are they different from what actually happened in the book. So for example, based on what I read, I now realize that although I thought that Jimmy was an older person returning to the community after many years away, Jimmy's actually a minor gone for only 18 months. So I looked at what I did think, and now I'm telling you what I think now. It's like kind of I used to think, and now this is what I think. The second sentence starter, the evidence that supports my thinking. That's how they want you to start the sentence. This is the place where you would point out, this is the sentence. I'm going to say sentence. This is the sentence where you would point out places in the book that support your revised or your new ideas and your new conclusions. So for example, the evidence that supports my thinking is that he was only 15 years old when he was sent away to juvenile detention, so he could not have been an adult, right? The title didn't tell me that. I have to read that to know that. Sorry. Okay. The third sentence starter, I can now conclude. Okay. It's kind of one of the harder ones. This can relate to any of the predictions you originally made about Jimmy or the events in the book. What's your new conclusion, right? I'm going to write that there. Okay. Your new or prediction, I guess. Okay. Oops. Hang on. Sorry. Hit the wrong button there. I can now conclude that this story might be about Jimmy's ups and downs coming back to his community, since that seems to be the most important event in chapter 1. And you know what? As we read, we might find out, is that correct or is that not correct? And then the fourth sentence starter, I think blah, 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 because, and then you give your reasons for thinking whatever the blah, blah, blah was. And again, this might be a new prediction. Now that you have new information from chapter one, how does that change what you think might happen? What goes on in chapter not one that makes you think that? So, and it could be if you said something like, if your prediction was that Jimmy was this really bad person who did bad things, you might say, well, I think that Jimmy is actually a good person because, and you'd explain why you think that. Or I think that the cops are going to, what do you think the cops are going to do? I think that Gookum, what's the Gookum going to do, right? So we've only read chapter one. So please don't go past chapter one yet, because we do sometimes do predictions and it's hard to do if you've already read it. And then people make me make predictions that are so accurate that I know they've already read it, which kind of destroys the point. I know for this one, it's a very short novel and the language is pretty simple, I think, but we're also trying to practice this, especially if you're someone who's taking this course because you're planning to go on to college or university. There's going to be times where you don't have time to read the next chapter or the language is quite hard, and you're going to have to honestly be making predictions about something that's a little bit harder to read. So you want to make sure we practice now so that you're ready and available to do that skill when it comes up again. Okay. Tomorrow we are going to look at assignment number 8. Number 8 is a funny one. It's about after reading, and I find it is the assignment that people have had the most trouble with. It's just somehow confusing to people. So we're going to spend the whole time talking about it, which I wouldn't normally do. But we definitely are going to spend some time with that. If you can, take a moment tonight to look at it, read it, think about whether you understand it. If you have any questions, calling me tomorrow while I'm at the studio talking about it is a great idea. Because you know what? If you've had a question about it, I guarantee there are probably 20 other students out there who've also had a question about it. So don't be worried, don't be shy. It's totally fine to ask me questions. Now, if you're not comfortable doing that, it's also totally fine to send me an email and I'd be happy to read it and get back to you. Let me think. Yep, we're good. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Have a good evening.